Welcome to That Could Have Been an Email. I'm Leslie Bailey.
And I'm Ron Shaw.
And we started this podcast to discuss the good, bad, and ugly of project managing, bring humor to our everyday project management and client situations, and a place to commiserate on all those things that our partners, friends who aren't in the industry never understand. Hi, everybody. Welcome to That Could Have Been an Email. I'm Leslie Bailey. Along with me always is Ron Shaw. And today we are bringing you episode 5, which I'm sure everybody is going to identify with. If you haven't really registered with the other episodes we've done, the tangled web of email threads we find ourselves in on projects. So, hey, Ron, how's it going?
All right, Leslie, how are you doing?
Good. We're starting off this Tuesday with something that I think we've all identified with. Maybe, again, like we said on the last podcast, we're guilty of or have been part of, where you start an email thread to a certain person and it just snowballs into a circle of conversation. So we wanted to talk about this because, again, our big message is interpretation. We talked a lot about that on the last episode with direct messaging. And when you start an email thread, there's typically one goal, right? To either get a decision out of it, get a question answered, close the loop on something. Does that always happen? No.
No.
So we wanted to bring this to light because it happens a lot and we find ourselves in circles. Everybody gets frustrated and the common goal that everybody had gets completely lost. And everybody, again, probably goes on sides. Who's taking whose side on what? So I wanted to bring this up because it's a really important conversation, especially when there's either a team of people or it's you working with this team of people on the other side. And you always want to protect yourself. You always want to be able to cover your bases with everything you're project managing. So there's a lot that it gets packed into this. So first, let's talk about the word just. I was telling Ron about this article I read about how you shouldn't use the word just in emails because it conveys the wrong message. And I was also reading in the same article that a higher percentage of women use the word just in emails. I'm completely guilty of it. The reason I do it is I don't want to seem pushy, which is completely ridiculous. If I'm trying to get a decision or a task out of you, it's ridiculous that I have to think of how exactly I'm phrasing that. So, Ron, would you say that you're a just user?
I don't believe I am. I would have to go back and actually look through my emails, but I don't believe I do it. I'm very direct, sometimes
Mm-hmm.
too direct in emails. So I don't know if I'm a juster. Have you seen it in my emails? You've been on the
I don't
receiving
think
end of them
so.
before.
No, I think I've seen directness with I need you to do this. It's been 3 days. Do it now. Yeah, no, I don't think I have. I definitely have. I'm a lot more guilty of doing it with external clients than I am if I'm working on a team of people. Um, and you know what? I think mine comes from knowing the pressure of being that client on the other side and people asking me for things left and right all day long. And you don't want to seem like you're piling onto it, which typically you are. We can't get away from that. Everybody's piling
Sure.
on everybody's
Right.
workloads during the day and vice versa. So I think mine came from a place of wanting to give you a gentle nudge, but not wanting to seem like I'm sitting here waiting for you to send that. But you ultimately can't get away from that in projects. And typically, a lot of my projects, I'll speak for myself, there's a bigger team of people. So the person I'm working with in direct contact has to go through all these people to get those tasks or those projects. So it always seems like you're being polite, but in the end, you're just sending the same message. It doesn't matter if I had the word just in there or not. I'm still telling you to do something. So,
So
yeah, go ahead.
So when you're talking about just so
Mhm.
I'm clear on this, we're talking like just a reminder. Is that the type of just we're referencing?
Yeah, just a friendly nudge, which it is friendly, but everybody knows what you're doing behind that nudge. Yeah, just a reminder, or again, just telling you this is due today, kind of thing where they know. I mean, everybody knows. Everybody has a project timeline that they're aware of. It's just that they sometimes don't meet that deadline. And sometimes it's not even their fault. Like I said, they've got a team of people that somebody's out, or, a graphic design is taking longer than expected. There's all types of reasons why these come up. But in the end, you're the project manager. It's your job to send those reminders and keep everybody on time.
Right.
So it's definitely, I think, a personal thing I had to get over. And I think I actually have. I think I've become a little bit more direct with, putting it out there that it is due today. If you don't meet it, this is what's going to happen. And sometimes, you know what? It's not a big deal. Sometimes it's not. It's just something you set on a timeline. It doesn't affect the rest of the project. However, you want to watch how lenient you are with that as well. Because if you tell them, don't worry about it, it's just a date, we can do it 10 days from now. They're going to take
Yeah,
that.
they
They're going
will
to be like,
take
okay,
it.
great. I'll send it to you on day 11. Because they will just take that much time. And sometimes they need that. So it's interesting because after I read this article, I kind of thought about how much I do it. And it was right on, it was spot on. So I'll try to find the article. It was a long time ago. It just brought it back to life when we were talking about this topic. So I'll try to find it in case anybody's interested in assessing their communications for that particular word.
Yeah, I don't believe I use just. Most of the time thinking about this when I respond and it's a deadline issue, I will generally ask for a status update.
Mm-hmm.
Say, could you please provide a status update on XYZ? We had a deliverable or due date of today.
Yeah.
Give them the opportunity to provide that. And then after there, I become a little more direct if I don't get responses.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about everybody's favorite thing. And I know this is Ron's favorite because he told me when you send an email and either BCC people or copy people that weren't on the original request or email thread.
So
And
there's a couple of things, and this is what gets me on this particular topic. So one, adding people.
yeah.
That's great, but why are you adding them? Because people will notice this as you're looking. So it's good. I've seen where people go adding and they put the person's name
Mm-hmm.
at the top.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Why are you adding them?
Right.
Give a
Right.
little bit of a reason why. That way, everybody else in the conversation understands why this person's now added in. In some cases, maybe within an organization, that's self-explanatory, but sometimes people just add on,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and it's confusing when you're looking at this, going, "Okay, why is this person here now?"
Right.
The other problem with that is, as you start adding more people, then they're going to have to go back through and figure out what they're added on for. Maybe there was a
Mm-hmm.
conversation on the phone or something. Great, but if not, they don't even know why they're in this conversation now. And this will bleed into something we could talk about later, is
Yeah.
about having to now scroll through an entire email to figure out what
Yes.
the relevant point is.
Yes.
Uh, the other one is the BCC.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
When you BCC someone on there, if you haven't given them prior warning that you're adding them and they
Yeah.
don't realize they're BCC'd versus CC'd, and then reply to everyone, and then everybody else starts looking, when did they get added to the
Mm-hmm.
conversation? So it's some of those things that just kind of irk me when people do that. Rather than just say, hey, I'm adding this person in, or if you need a BCC, sometimes you have to do that with managers to copy them
Yeah.
on it, but make sure they know ahead of time so they don't go and respond to the chain. And then,
Mm-hmm.
because what that does is that erodes trust, because people are like, why are you
Yeah.
BCCing someone on here?
For sure. I don't even think you have to BCC one to erode trust either. Like it can be a simple copy. And like you said, it's got so many moving parts to it, right? If you're the person who originally sent it and now I get it back from you and there's six other people on it, why? And especially if it gets kind of hierarchy, if you're an organization. So if you just randomly um, copied my manager or my director, now I'm thinking there's a problem. Why
Right.
are they on here? Because I didn't originally put them on here. So again, it goes back to kind of being aware of what the reaction might be and the interpretation might be. Like you said, if you're not saying why you're putting these people on. Now, I do enjoy the people who in the email put at Ron, see this because you owe this graphic design. Great. At least I know why
Right.
he's on there. And he knows why he's on there. He knows what he needs to do. But it's on the other side, like you said, if I'm being added and I don't know, I have to go through your whole email and I still have to figure out why I'm on here. And who wants to do that? Nobody wants to scroll through an email chain. I hate forwards. I try not to forward if I don't have to because it's annoying as hell.
Yeah.
Because it forwarding no context, hate it. Unless you're out of the office and you tell me that I'm your out of office, it's the worst.
And there's the other part of this that I know I'm guilty of. I occasionally forget and do this is I'll forward, but I'm nice enough to put FYI,
Mhm.
but I don't explain why I'm FYI. And that
Yeah.
it's you provide no context for the person when they're receiving this email, and they're just going to look at it and go, "Okay, great." And if you do FYI without any context, they may not even read it. They're just going to go,
Mhm.
unless it's something they already know about. It's like, great, what's the purpose of me
Do you know
looking
what's
at
weird
this?
about FYI is in my head, no matter who sends it to me, I always read it as somehow like snotty. I don't know why. It's like I just read it as FYI. Like, and
For
I there's something
information.
about it, yes, that I just am like, okay, well, I'm not gonna read this. So I don't know why. I've had that forever, like in my entire career. I do not know why it's something like that. It could be like you or the nicest person ever sending it to me, and I would still read it as like, ew.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's an interesting thing about forwards too, is when people put something like that, it's really short. I always read it that way, even though it's probably not coming across that way at all. It's just the way that I read into it.
Back to something you were talking about before this was is when people add like a manager or director or someone
Mm-hmm.
else on the chain. When you're working on a project, at least from what I can recall from my project management days, when someone does that, it kind of makes
Mm-hmm.
you feel like, okay, great. So did I do something wrong here? Why are these people added? I used to have clients that would do that on a regular basis. Like they
Yeah.
would start adding like the salesperson back on,
Mm-hmm.
a manager, like it went up to like higher levels because they knew someone. And typically this happens when they're not getting answers that they like. It's not
Right.
necessarily that you've done anything wrong. You're just probably not giving them the answers that they want to hear, even though it may
Mm-hmm.
be realistic of what it is. They just start adding everybody because they're trying to use that pressure to push and get what they want.
Yeah. And no offense to our salespeople, we love our salespeople. It's just, it sets something, if a salesperson is copied, it sets a red flag for them as well. Then they're now direct messaging you, asking why they're on here,
Right.
what's going on with this, which causes anxiety and stress. So it's, yeah. And the same thing with a manager. I mean, if I was somebody's manager and I'm now copied, I'm going to ask you what the problem is because I'm thinking there is one. Since I don't know what this is, somebody's copied me into it. Now I have to deal with it too. So it's just kind of thinking of that. And more often than not, I think you're right, it is that people aren't getting the answer they want. And it sucks to know that that's a tactic that people use to go around you. And it's
Mhm.
happened to me before. And I mean, I had one of the best managers of my life, still my friend now. And she would never cave on that. She would come to me first and be like, "What's the answer you gave them?" I would tell her, she was like, "I don't understand the problem. There's no other solution." And it was awesome because she would go back to them and be like, "I don't see a problem. This is the solution she gave you." She's the
Right.
project manager. And that's the kind of support I think a lot of people need. That's harder with independent contractors. Obviously, there's no one but you.
Yeah.
Um, but it's sad that that's a tactic to go around someone. And normally I would let it happen because I knew what the outcome was going to be. I was confident in the recommendations and suggestions I was giving. But it's something that you, to me, makes you hold a little bit more firm on, or in some instances, maybe look for a different solution, a third option, or
Right.
something like that. And that's not bad. That's just you're trying to kind of just close the loop on the situation. So yeah, in times that's super annoying, and I mean, you just kind of just have to roll with it.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely can get frustrating when that happens. But in your case, you had someone that was a good manager that came and talked to you
Mm-hmm.
versus jumping into the email full of piss and vinegar and
Yeah.
starting to go off. And that's the worst is when they second guess you. Someone from your own team second guesses you on an
Mm-hmm.
email with the client.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those things where you separate the client, have that conversation behind the scenes. If there is any question of it, get all of the information. Then if they need to respond, great. Allow them
Yeah.
to respond back to the client in kind, but always internally having that conversation first before lighting the fire right there with the client front and center
Mhm.
stage.
And that's actually a good tip for any kind of newer salespeople too, is go to your project manager first. Find out first what's actually happening, because if you get in there and say, oh, I'll work with them to find another solution, or you reply just off the cuff, and then you go back and you realize there is no other solution, then it looks like you guys are completely disjointed. You
Mhm.
don't know what's happening with the project, and you're trying to foster that relationship. So you need to know exactly what's going on. Do you need to know all the details and how everything's built and works? No. But you at least need to give your project manager that support and that confidence that you are all on the same team to get this client across the finish line. Talk to them first before you jump in and have some kind of reaction to just make the client happy.
Absolutely. And one of the things I always did in those situations where if I ever sensed tension and I figured something like that might be coming is preemptively, I would go to either salesperson or whoever my manager or director was at the time, say, hey, this is getting a little tense. I'm still trying to work through it, but I want to give you a heads up in case
Yeah.
they decide to escalate. And that always worked out because then it wasn't a shock to them if something did come through. I always continued to try working until I was at an impasse, and then if I had to escalate personally, I would.
Mm-hmm.
But it's giving them that awareness that hey, this might be happening. I'm going to do my best to resolve it, but just to prepare you, it may
Yeah.
come.
Yeah. And I mean, the good thing about doing that too is because I mean, that's happened to me a lot. And I will give myself credit for one thing. I'm super transparent. If there's ever a problem, I'm the first one to be like, I need to tell you something. So that comes into play also with, if I've come to you and tell you like you're saying, this person is just having this reaction to everything. I don't know what's happening. And you know this client better than I do. You can tell me they do this all the time. There
Right.
is no problem. This is how they react to everything, you know, which is going to help me because then I'm going to realize there is actually no problem. It's just how they are. It's how they react to certain phrasing or solutions, or in some cases, I think a lot of times on client teams, the person leading may not know all the specifics or technicalities of what's going on, which is fine. They don't always, that's why they have a team. But I think in certain instances, if they feel like they don't know what you're talking about
Mhm.
or they don't follow, the automatic reaction is defense and finding a
Right.
problem. And there usually isn't one. It's just if you're more open to asking questions, or I do this all the time, honestly being like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Um, that's going to open those gates a little bit more than
Right.
to get in this circular conversation of, these details that you don't honestly understand.
Yeah, and it's remembering the purpose, like you started off with. Are you answering a question?
Mm-hmm.
It's getting back to the root of what's going on with the email
Right.
and just trying to reach resolution to complete the email. Because
Mm-hmm.
nothing becomes more frustrating when you look and see the same subject line
Ugh.
30 times spread down because it's gone back and forth. But that also to the point, I think part of what we're trying to make here
Mm-hmm.
is the more people you add into a thread or a conversation, the larger that can become. And because at that point, everybody that you've invited in can share their opinion. It's
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
Facebook, just because it's there, well, guess what? People think they've got the opportunity to tell you what they think about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, and that creates a problem too, because then you have some people who don't know all the details that you do throwing out suggestions or whatever it is, and it makes no sense. And then sometimes you also get the people who are answering, let's say, two questions ago.
Mhm.
And now it doesn't make sense. It's like when you get held hostage in a group text, and some people have iPhones, some people have droids. It's out of order. It doesn't make any damn sense. That's what it's like. And it's you spent, let's say, hours on this email chain when you could have actually been doing other things. It's again, it's an awareness of time and just what the goal is of it. Did I ask you one question and now it turned into 10?
Right. I mean, sometimes naturally, I think things will add a couple of questions as you're trying to solve. One question may open a couple other, but the more people you add in, that's potential of like, so say each person has three questions. Now, if you've added 10 people,
Mm-hmm.
oh, wow, you've got a lot of questions now to try and figure out and how to respond to. But
Yeah.
it's also making sure the relevant people are on there. One of the challenges I've had in the past is where a director or someone above wanted to be CC'd on every single email. And I
Hmm.
think that's not necessarily great for them, and it's not great for you either.
Hmm.
Personally, when I've been in the manager seat, I normally tell my teams only CC me if you need to.
Right.
I'm like,
Right.
I don't want to be on everything. I don't need to be on everything. Just include me if there's something you need me to be aware of, but also if there's something I need to answer or respond, make sure you call it out. Like we said before,
Hmm.
like the adding that you can do in there. That way I understand what it is, what action you need me to take. Otherwise, if it just gets forwarded to me, one, it's not a priority
Hmm.
because I have no idea if I've just been added into a chain and I'm looking at it going, if I can't figure out within the first paragraph of what I'm seeing what the
Yeah.
problem is, more than likely I'm going to stop reading because it didn't have a specific call out for me. And I'm figuring it's probably just awareness. I'm not going to pay much more attention because
Hmm.
no one asked me to do anything.
Yeah. Yeah. It's that. And then the emails you get with the one question, but there's no context. That's when it snowballs into people copying other people, is when you ask one question without any context to it and somebody forwards it to somebody else. It just it's communication is such a big thing in this industry, and it's interesting how it's still kind of a big problem.
Right.
Um,
And it's, thinking about them, I'm kind of laughing here because
mm,
when I've gotten some of these where I get forwarded, what do you think about this? And it's a whole chain of email below. I'm like, what part? And I have fired back at people before on that, saying which part of it. There's like six different things going on here. Am I reading
mhm.
just the last? Am I reading through this whole thing? What are you looking to get my thoughts on? Be a little bit more
Right.
specific on that.
Well, and what thoughts do you want?
Right.
Do you want me to approve of this, throw out a different idea? Yeah, it's just I think people are moving so quickly too that that's why it turns into just firing off one thing, and hoping that that person knows, when it usually turns into minutes, hours wasted on just
Right.
trying to figure out what you were trying to ask me. And I don't know if this bothers you, but I hate when you're the initial person on the email. Let's say it goes through the circle of threads and everybody trying to figure it out, and then some higher up just replies and was like, "I talked to blah blah on the phone. We figured it out." But they don't actually tell you what they figured out. They just tell you that they took care of it. That is my biggest pet peeve, I think, because if it was my initial thing to figure out or to help with, and you just went around me and talked to this person and now solved it, but I also don't know the solution, to me, that's really disrespectful of project manager. Because if you're
Mhm.
trusting them to get the solution, if they're trying to get that, and then to make it quick, you just go around them and figure it out. I think that's a problem.
Right. And I definitely in my earlier years I was guilty of doing things like that. But what I learned is one, you negate the ability for that person to learn how to
Mm-hmm.
solve the problem. That way if it comes up again, because more than likely you're gonna run into similar or the same
Yeah.
issue again. So you've taken that away from them without including them in the conversation or at least explaining to them what happened. But also by just going around them and that circumventing it prevents them from being able to understand what happened in case
Mm-hmm.
something breaks, like especially if you're working in a software or type situation. If they don't know what was done and you just said it was taken care of, if something else goes down on further down the line and it roots back to that, they're not going to realize it because they had no involvement or
Yeah.
participation in what happened there.
Mm-hmm.
But I
Mm-hmm.
think again the worst part of it is the fact of you're taking away a learning opportunity for that person to understand that. So it's rather than go around them, if you know how to solve it or know the right channels, bring them through that process and educate them that way. As it does come up again, you don't have to be the one to do it.
Well, and I think you're also, and this is going to sound like a harsh word, but I can't really think of another one for it right now. You're also making it okay for that client or their team member to, in the future, go around them or undermine them.
Right.
And that sets a horrible tone for your entire project, because then your project manager is more just on the sidelines. They're not the ones being the confident leader of
Mhm.
this project or these teams. And that's the sad thing too, because then if you're an independent contractor or this client team, that might foil any opportunities for future work. If you thought I couldn't handle it, or vice versa, I thought all you're going to do is go around me, and make these decisions that I wasn't a part of. And I mean, that sucks, because ultimately, if you're an agency or a contractor, you're trying to set this relationship with people so you can work with them in the future. And um, you just always, it's tough. I mean, it is a tough relationship to foster. I think anybody would tell you that,
Mhm.
client or contractor on both sides. So you always just want to keep that kind of line of communication open. And I think it's
Right.
also a new thing we're getting into, and I've seen this a little bit more, is people being super direct on, well, I don't like that answer. I don't like the solution. Okay, then let's talk about it. Let's not just try to kind of get something else out of me that's not there.
Right. And you know, one of the other things is you're going through this process, if you're a leader or manager or whatever, and a client is all of a sudden coming asking you about a project that you have a team member assigned to that's working.
Mm-hmm.
It's always pausing, because sometimes it is easy just to give an answer, but you don't know the conversation necessarily that's taken place on the team. So
Yeah.
it's always pausing yourself, saying, let me go back and check with the team on this, because that you really need to route that back through, because there may be information you don't have as to why a specific path was chosen,
Mm-hmm.
or direction
Mm-hmm.
was taken. So going back to the team and saying, hey, what's happening here? I got this email. I've had incidences throughout my career where a director, leader, manager will just go and try and solve something, but they didn't understand some of the pieces, and it ended
Mm-hmm.
up spiraling into a horrible shit spin show there, that where everything was just all over the place now, because I'm like, well, now we're going to have to fix this, because this is why we didn't do that in the first place. This is why we didn't agree to that. Or even more dangerous is when the person at that next level may not have some of the technical understanding, and then has promised something that, we
Yeah.
can't do it.
Yeah. And I think it goes back to what you said about the learning opportunities too,
Mhm.
because I've definitely been in that position where somebody will come and tell me about a project that another team member is leading, ask me how I would do it or what I would do. I can tell you what I would do, but you know what? That's easy for me to say because I've been doing it for so long. If
Right.
this other person hasn't been doing it that long, you need to give them that opportunity. And I think a lot of the time we're just thinking so quickly, thinking get it done, that we don't take that into account
Right.
enough. That we're never going to have enough team members to do some of these things because we're not letting them have this experience. So, yeah.
And from the manager side, leadership side, whatever we want to call it today, um, the other thing is not necessarily just giving an answer. Part of what you do to help teams and help your team grow
Mhm.
is ask them, well, what do you think is the right solution? I know people don't like that sometimes, but it
Right.
at least gets them thinking, and you can understand where they're at before you start giving tons of information, because they might already have the right
Mhm.
solution, and that's going to build up their confidence if they already have, and be like, you've already got it, you're in the right direction, maybe just adjust this here and here and
Yeah.
go for it, rather than just telling them do this. Ask them what their thoughts, where are they at with it, what do they think should be done with it. It allows them that space, that if they're not right, obviously
Mhm.
you don't scold them to say, okay, interesting way of looking at it, but maybe this is the direction you ought to go. Guide them that way, but it at least keeps them using that critical thinking skill to develop and also build up their own confidence of, oh, okay, I at least had some of it right.
Yeah. And I also, one thing I used to do a lot, and this is when I was actually in an organization, is I would ask for legacy information on the client. Because if, we've talked about this a lot too today, and I think in one of our other podcasts, is it's all about phrasing. If I
Mhm.
hit a word that I know you hate, you're going to shut me down immediately. It's just going to happen. So I always have been kind of a big proponent of asking other people that have worked with a specific client team or even a specific organization about What are their pain points? What do they like? That way I can stay away from that phrasing. I know that if I made a suggestion and they don't like a word or the way I said it, they're ultimately going to shut it down. So it's something I've also looked into as well.
And that's why it's important to keep your CRMs up to date.
Yes. Yes. It's going to help out so much and it makes things go so much quicker when a new project manager or a new contractor comes in and you already know what to tell them about your last event. It's gonna help a lot, especially with vendors as well.
Yeah, having that historical knowledge of their experience, especially if they are a long-standing client,
Mm-hmm.
you can see a history there. And I've worked with places that have done good with that, places that haven't done good with that. The ones that have done good, I didn't even necessarily have to have a lot of conversations because I could go in, people that kept track of it. I could see email chains that I've gone through and get a good understanding. And from an events perspective, if there was notes about their previous events, the best thing is always seeing when people, took track of what went good, what went bad, because then you automatically know at that point, especially on those bad points, like what do I need to watch out for? What were their pain points last time so we don't repeat that this time?
Yeah, and it's interesting too because it's kind of like and I mean, don't take offense to this because you're a guy. It's kind of like when you go on a date with a dude and he tells you all of his ex-girlfriends were crazy. That's not true. They can all be crazy. That's a huge stroke of bad luck if they are. And that's kind of the same when somebody tells you, oh my God, this client is crazy, or this person is just crazy. That happened to me at one of the first jobs I ever had. And I went into it being like, oh my God, I'm so scared. Um, and the woman was delightful. Like they weren't crazy. They just liked things the way they liked them. And if you learn that, you were golden.
Right.
So it's interesting because it's such a different outlook. And I feel like your people's perspectives are different because if you like to only send, let's say, one weekly email a week, you don't like to over communicate, you are going to think a client is crazy when they want a bunch of updates and specific information. But if you're kind of like me where you're sending it just to keep it up to date, it doesn't bother you. So it's the legacy information is great, but take it with a grain of salt sometimes because it's not always the case.
Right. It's understanding the working styles. It can give you a good starting point, but to the point you're making, it does. It's good to go in and meet with them, see where they're from, because you will find that. I've had the same thing before where people would kind of be like, "This client's the worst. They're horrible." I get on, and I'm like, "This is the most delightful person in the
Yeah.
world. I don't
Yeah.
understand it." And it could just be that personality clashes. I mean, we definitely, it's the same thing to your point of dating, like it's
Yeah.
personalities that aren't lining up, not necessarily that someone's crazy. It's just you view the world differently, have different work styles,
Right.
and that's where it ends up coming up to that. It's just incompatible.
hmm hmm That's a good point. Yeah, it's a lot to think about. I know we talk a lot about communication and it's just, I mean, it's so different now because there's so many different avenues of it. And there's so many, because of those avenues, there's so many ways to interpret what you were trying to tell me and what I think you were trying to tell me. And it's not always correct. We talked about that in the last episode. So it does get more difficult, but I think people have kind of come around to being a little bit more open to having those kind of slower, sometimes negative conversations. You just have to get to the next step in your event or your project. It's inevitable, but it clears it up so much.
It does.
It gets those hours out of there that like you're spending trying to decipher what they're saying, complaining to other team members about this email you got. It just frees up. To me, it frees up your time and your mind at the same time, just to close the loop on it.
Yeah, and I think that's great, and I think that's also a great place for us to kind of end today. I mean, that's just a great point to carry off. Before we do wrap up, I want to tell everyone about what we're going to do for
Yeah.
the months of October and November. So for every download view of our episodes, and then we'll be tracking them, I'm going to donate $1 to a charity. We'll figure out the charity as we get there, but we're going to total those up. So from our first episode in October, which is the previous one, all the way through November. Is it 30th or 31st? I'm never good with
I
them.
think it's 30th.
The 30th.
Yeah.
Okay. So all the way through there. And then what we'll do is with our first December episode, I'll announce what that total is and we'll somewhere between now and then, we'll figure out which charity we're going to give it to. So view, share, download, whatever you need to do, get those numbers up for us so we can put some good money into charity.
All right. Then you can, in December, when you announce it, grow the beard out and then make it all white. And it's like your Santa.
I have a Santa hat. So we will do that
Done.
when we get to our December episodes, I promise. Maybe I'll even go buy dye and just, get rid of these few spots that are still colorful.
Take the plunge.
All right. Leslie, it's been great as always. Everyone, thank you, and we'll see you again next week.
Bye, everybody.